Heather had came through the kitchen door after being outside. She had been riding her bicycle up and down our driveway, and my wife began to call out loud for me. And she said, "Steve, come quickly, there's something wrong with Heather."
I looked over at Heather and her eyes were shifting from side to side. In great fear, I just didn't know what was happening. As I screamed for my husband, he came into the room just in time to catch her before she collapsed in the floor.
What is that?
I want to hear you say, Look, there's batteries in there, Wanda. Let me have it. I want the batteries in it. Okay. You want to play? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Heather. Happy birthday to you.
There's nothing unusual about the beginning of Heather's story. Born to Steve and Wanda Cape on January 3, 1985, Heather's future was as bright as her personality.
Heather was extremely happy as a child from the time she was born, and she had a way of capturing your heart. As she grew older, she was very bright, very smart and intelligent, and always singing was such a part of her.
Well, Heather was my first granddaughter, and first grandchild for that matter. And she was awesome. At a young age, I remember like 3 or 4 years old, I'd call my daughter and she'd answer the phone and she said, "Mom's busy, can I take a message?" And she didn't recognize my voice. And she said, and she'll call you right back. So that was pretty amazing to me. That was before they had computers and all the stuff they got nowadays. They learn so much now, but she was something. And she's always polite and always energetic. Another good word for Heather. She was very energetic.
I remember she was the big sister. I remember when our daughter Jenna was born, she was so excited and wanted to love on that sister and take care of her and hold her. And then when Hannah came along, her and Jenna both are doing the same thing with Hannah. But Heather led the way. She would get the girls together and teach them a song and get their parts down and then come to us and say, "We've learned a new song together."
Heather was 9 years old, and she was one of my helpers in junior church. And we tried to conduct junior church just like big church. So we had our junior deacons and we had missionaries we supported, and Heather volunteered to be the missionary correspondent. And she communicated back and forth with the missionaries, and they communicated with the church through Heather. And then she came to us and said that she felt like the Lord was calling her into mission work. And I've just always been very impressed with Heather and her dedication to the Lord.
She was very spry. She was a thin-framed little girl, And she ran, she jumped, she somersaulted. As a little girl, she sang all the time. She would run and play just like every normal little child would do. But at the age of 9, things changed drastically.
July 15th, 1994 was a normal Saturday for our family. We're very involved in the ministry and had been doing things for our church for the day, and we were having company come over for dinner that afternoon. Our daughter Jenna was extremely excited, and she went to jump off the porch and was holding the hand of one of the members of our church who was at our house, and the lady fell on top of her and broke her leg.
As we got her into the living room and tried to check her out to see if her leg was broken, my wife began to call out loud for me. And she said, "Steve, come quickly, there's something wrong with Heather."
Heather had been riding her bike up and down the driveway, and while her parents tended to Jenna, she fell and hit her head hard on the ground. Dazed and confused, she struggled to her feet and headed towards the house to find her mother.
I looked over at Heather, and her eyes were shifting from side to side. In great fear, I just didn't know what was happening. As I screamed for my husband, he came into the room just in time to catch her before she collapsed in the floor.
It would take nearly 45 minutes for Heather to stop seizing, and yet this seizure was just the beginning. No one could have known that in an instant, Heather's life had changed forever. Without a diagnosis, Heather was released from the hospital and all seemed to be well. 2 months later, however, the unthinkable happened.
I had been up that night pretty late planning some things for our church ministry, and I heard very loud noise going on. I actually thought somebody was breaking in her house. And so I got up from my recliner and began to walk through the house and began to turn lights on, checking windows. The very first place I went was to look in the bedroom of my daughter Jenna and Hannah. They had bunk beds, and as I looked into their room, they were fine. And then I turned back into where Heather's room was, and when I turned the light on, I saw that Heather was in a full grand mal tonic-clonic seizure, a seizure that would last for 6 hours long.
For 6 hours straight, the left and right side of Heather's body would seize one after the other. During this grand mal seizure, Heather's brain would be deprived of oxygen, and when she awoke, she would not be the same. After several days at the Floyd Medical Center in Rome, Georgia, Heather's condition failed to improve, and she was transferred to Eggleston Children's Hospital at Emory University in Atlanta.
As a pediatric neurologist at Eggleston Children's Hospital at the time, now part of Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, we see children transferred from all over the state who have had seizures, short, long, independent seizures, or seizures with other medical conditions. Heather was transferred here after a prolonged seizure and concerned that there was an infection, and she was on medication treating her for infection at the time.
So a seizure is an electrical storm in the brain. So it's an excessive electrical discharge that is out of control, and it causes involuntary movements or a change in consciousness or abnormal sensations. It can vary a lot depending on where the seizure starts, where it spreads, how fast it spreads, and how far it spreads.
Watching someone have a seizure can be very frightening for anybody at any age. You feel helpless because you don't exactly know what to do. You're concerned for the person because you don't want them to hurt. And I remember many times that I would watch Heather have a seizure, and I couldn't do anything to help her. And just be there for her and hold her and make sure she was comfortable was the only thing that I could do, or the only thing that our family could do to try to help Heather during those times.
There are many seizure types, and the classification of seizures is changing so that we describe new seizure types with every new classification model. But in general, the most common seizures are focal seizures that start in one part of the brain, in one part of one hemisphere. And if these seizures stay very localized, we used to call them simple partial seizures, where there's no change in consciousness. But then the seizures may spread beyond that one hemisphere, and they can cause loss of consciousness. And then if the seizures become all over the brain, they cause a generalized tonic-clonic seizure, where there is generalized stiffening and jerking of all extremities.
She remained there in hospital stay for about 2 weeks. They started Heather on some anticonvulsants. They saw some other therapies, plus ran multiple tests. And then they sent her home. All of our life schedule was changed. There was nothing normal to our life at the time. And it was now going from doctor to doctor. Within just a few weeks, we'd be back at the hospital again. Within just a few months, the hospital again. Another emergency room visit, another specialist that we would see, a new diagnosis, questions that were given, and then seeking to also be able to serve in a ministry that we're serving in, and making sure the rest of our family was well cared for.
As a sibling of someone who is going through many health issues, as was Heather, there are times that the sibling can feel rejected or maybe not important. But during this case, my parents always made sure that me and my other sister were okay.
As we were going through this together as a family, we tried to remember our other daughters and what they may be experiencing, and did our very best to, at all times, one of us be with them while Heather's care was so critical that we had to, we couldn't leave her. One of us had to be with her. And it wasn't something that anybody else in the family could understand, so it required either my husband or myself to be with her at all times. So it left our other two daughters lots of times without the other parent.
When a family has a child that's afflicted in some way, it affects the entire family. It doesn't just affect that one individual. It affects, of course, their parents or their parents, and it affects the siblings. In Heather's case, she had two younger sisters. They were troopers.
Throughout the next year and a half, Heather's health continued to rapidly decline. There were numerous visits to the ER, and seizures became more frequent and violent. In June of 1995, Heather was also diagnosed with the rare disease of Parry-Romberg.
Parry-Romberg is a condition where there is a wasting of one half of the face. that actually the bones and the soft tissue begin shrinking. It is often accompanied by seizures. It is another rare symptom complex that's seen, only like 1 in 250,000 instances. What is interesting but unknown why is that it typically or most commonly is seen in girls between 5 and 15 years of age, and mostly occurs on the left side of the face. So that it begins without warning. It usually starts with seizures, and then notice that the face has changed very subtly at first, and then may have, as time goes by, more pronounced asymmetry develops in the face.
Most people do not understand a family that has a loved one or a child that has a difficult seizure disorder. For seizures can happen anytime, such as the case with Heather. She had them in the morning time, in the afternoon, in the evening. She had them all through her night. She had them when she was sleeping. They would awaken her multiple times again through the evening. At 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, we'd be at the emergency room because she was in status epilepticus again, meaning that she had one seizure after another seizure, and we couldn't get them under control through the normal protocol of administering an extra medicine or an extra pill. And so our lives were changed.
One thing we tried to do was accept that the seizures were a part of our lives, but not let them control them to the point that we couldn't function as a family. We still did our daily routines as much as possible until her health was so bad that we couldn't, we had to change schedules or whatever to get her to the hospital. But for the most part, she was sick, yes, but we functioned.
All 3 of our daughters were taught from a very young age of how to have a daily devotion, personal time with God. They were taught that the Bible is the Word of God. They were taught Scripture. When they could not read themselves, my wife would hold them in her lap and she would read 2 or 3 words in a verse, and they would repeat those words after her. So that was a part of our life. Every single day we would have a family time of being in the Bible. We would also share our request with each other, and our entire family would all pray individually with each other with the special needs that we have. Not only was there prayer and Bible time, but there was a lot of singing. Our family loved singing. When Heather was a little girl, she sang in the car riding down the road. She sang as she played. She sang at church in the little girls' ensemble or children's ensemble. We'd be just riding down the road in the car, going to the hospital, singing favorite songs that had been favorites to us. So things such as a song entitled An Opportunity, or Why Complain About an Opportunity? We're to rejoice because it is an opportunity that we can live for God and show that no matter what we go through, that God is with us. And that is something that our daughter now has shown us over and over and over of the truth of that very principle, biblical principle.
Heather's seizures got so bad that we had to put her in the hospital, and it was recorded that she was having over 200 a day. This was back in 1996, and she had gotten really bad. She could no longer walk. She could no longer swallow. They had to put an NG tube in to feed her, and she was basically an invalid lying in a bed, and every 10 minutes you would see an outward seizure manifest. And the doctors came to us and said the only thing that we can do is try to map out where these seizures are coming from to see if she's a candidate for surgery. And during that time was unbelievable. I had no idea what we were about to face. One of the hardest things for me was when they put her into a drug-induced coma for 10 days and her brain waves barely moved. But what they were doing in putting her in that coma was hoping to break the seizure pattern. And after the 10 days of being in the coma, they started backing off of the medication, and Heather started coming awake, and as soon as they extubated her with a tube, a seizure hit. And 10 minutes later, another seizure hit. And Dr. Holt looked at me with tears in his eyes and he said, I was hoping that we would break the pattern with this coma that we had put her in, but we didn't do it.
Heather's seizures continued to worsen despite all the medical therapies, and surgery was in the next consideration. Surgery for control of seizures involves finding which area of the brain triggers a seizure and is most actively involved, and then trying to remove that, taking into account that certain areas of the brain are more critical and need to be spared if at all possible. Heather's seizures, as she worsened to having every 10 minutes from what we could record on EEG, led to high-dose pentobarbital coma to stop the seizure activity, and then to try and identify where the seizures originated in the brain, utilized EEG mapping. Now, standard EEG requires placement of electrodes on the skull and measuring where the seizures come from. We could tell her seizures were coming from the left hemisphere, but we could not pinpoint specifically their origin. We knew from the beginning of facial wasting with the Parry-Romberg that we felt they were likely anterior in the left hemisphere. The MRI did not show total involvement of the hemisphere as often is seen with Rasmussen's, but we had the same features. And so it was elected to place electrodes directly on the surface of the brain to try and find the seizure onset. To place electrodes on the brain, she did have a craniotomy where a portion of the left side of the skull was removed. Electrodes were placed on the brain. As I recall, I think we used 3 grids to place up over the frontal lobe, over the temporal lobe, and up under the frontal lobe to find seizure onset. EEG grid electrodes did show the seizures were coming frontal, but also involving temporal lobe. It was not a consistent single area of onset. And so discussion with the family that since frontal lobe is involved in memory, but also on the left does help control the motor aspects of speech, that removing this area would run the risk that she would have difficulty speaking. Since the temporal lobe was involved electrically and I think also had some MRI changes, that was elected to try to do a partial temporal lobectomy and frontal lobectomy, trying to spare, if we could, the motor area for speech.
It was after this, within just a few days, that Heather would have her first brain resection. Again, it was in 1996. Heather was an 11-year-old child. She had already been in the hospital for 3 months. It was in the month of March. I'll never forget the day. We were in a waiting room with a few friends, and that day, it was a 12-hour long day, 12 hours while Heather was in surgery.
Surgeons at the time felt safest to do sort of the multi-lobectomy. There are more aggressive surgeries. The most aggressive is doing a hemispherectomy, and we felt that would lead to probably complete loss of speech, possibly without the ability to regain it, so did not want to do that.
Making the decision to have this surgery was very difficult, but we had to make a hard decision because Heather's seizures were so bad and she had no quality of life at all. But we also did not have the guarantee when they went into surgery if she could speak to us when she woke. So that was a very difficult time, a lot of prayer in order to make that decision. And I'll never forget, as they rolled her through the doors after the surgery, it was late at night, it was like 11 or 12 that night, and they said, "Do you want to see her?" And she's still on her bed headed to recovery. And we said yes, and her dad leaned down to her face and he said, "Boo, I love you." And she looked up at him with her big blue eyes and she said, "I love you too, Daddy."
Focused on only the sections of the brain that were causing the seizures, the surgeons removed portions from both the left frontal and temporal lobes. Although the surgery seemed to be a success and the seizures stopped, the pathology report revealed that Heather had another diagnosis, a rare disease of Rasmussen's encephalitis.
A Rasmussen's encephalitis is a rare condition where there is inflammation of one half of the brain. It comes on without known cause. Some thoughts that it is viral, other thoughts that it's some inflammatory reaction against the brain that the body triggers. That's always accompanied by very hard to control seizures and often is progressive and leads to weakness on the opposite side of the body and at times intellectual decline as well. Is felt to be occurring in only a few cases per 10 million. I mean, it is that rare.
We're at Eggleston Children's Hospital in Atlanta, and Heather and I are actually in the playroom right now. And this is where Heather comes to do activities with the other kids in the hospital and play and make things, and also sometimes to do schoolwork, right?
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about why you came to the hospital?
I came here so that way I can do more and learn more.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I came here.
Mm-hmm. And you were having something called seizures, right?
Right.
And so you needed to learn more about those seizures.
We didn't realize that speech is not only the verbal part, but there are also other areas of speech like word finding and short-term memory, which was greatly affected through this surgery. Heather had difficulties with that. That improved over time, but yet still had serious issues with trying to remember what she ate for breakfast, or trying to remember where she went that morning, or trying to find the right word. And sometimes you would have to cue her with the first letter of a word, and it would help her to find that word.
Heather is bouncing on this line.
Bouncing on one leg.
With PT, physical therapy.
Things began to look up for Heather. With the seizures abated, she began physical therapy, and was soon released from the hospital.
Hello, Heather.
Hello,
How are you?
I'm fine.
Good. I'm so glad you're getting to go home today.
That's great. I am too.
Good. I'm going to miss you.
I'm gonna miss you too.
I'm going to miss the decorations that you kept in your room.
I know it.
Are you going to put all your cards up at home?
Throughout her time in the hospital, Heather always showed more concern for others than herself and constantly brought joy to those around her.
The doctor come in, and there were several of us in the room. My pastor was there, Steve and Wanda, her parents, and he started telling what we're going to do to Heather. He was just talking like Heather wasn't in the room. He's going to cut around her scalp and pull her scalp back and put some electrodes on her brain and go monitor for, I think, a week. And he looked down and said, Heather, I am so sorry. He said, we're in here talking about what we're going to do, like you're not even in the room. He said, have you got any questions? She said, I got one. He said, what is it? She said, Jesus Christ, your Savior? And that just blew everybody away. And the doctor especially, he kind of stood there a minute. He said, that's a very good question. He said, yes, he is. And she said, okay. And that was it. That was awesome right there. Just, she wasn't worried about herself. She was worried about his being. Want to know if he was saved or not, which is something.
It's May 10th.
May the 10th.
That's right.
It's a big day.
You remember what day you came into the hospital? You were real sick. It was January 13th. You've been here all this time. Long time, isn't it?
Long time.
After this horrific 5-month stay at the Eggleston Hospital, the Capes hosted a special day of appreciation at their church to honor the medical staff who cared for their daughter.
Well, I don't have a prepared speech, but I think I would like to say that entered medicine with the goal of trying to help people. That was the way I was raised in a Baptist church. I'm just fortunate to really feel glad that Christ was giving me the strength, direction to study medicine and to be available to your church and the prayers that everybody has given them and supported them and all they've been through. And I'll be the first to admit that I think the prayers have helped guide the decisions and know it's guided the outcomes. And Heather still continues to need prayer.
As much as everyone wanted this to be the end of the storm, it in fact was not.
After Heather had a brain surgery in '96, within just a few months, her seizures returned again. We were pretty disappointed, to say the least. They began to come back with force, slowly at first, and then she began to have grand mal seizures again and tonic-clonic. They began to go back and do, again, IVIG treatments and immunoglobulin, heavy doses of solumedrol, prednisone intravenously, again trying to stop her seizures. It was also determined at the same time that Heather needed to have a brain shunt put in at the time, believing that would assist her because of hydrocephalus that was beginning to take place in Heather's brain.
The seizures continued to get worse and worse in spite of every treatment that they offered, in spite of medication after medication. And there was a new device that came out called a vagus nerve stimulator, and Heather was the first female patient down at Eggleston Hospital in Atlanta to have that implant, and that aided her greatly.
This is a plastic copy. of the VNS stimulator, and this is actually an old model. It's the 103 model, which Heather actually had one of those at one time. But basically, it's a pacemaker. But it's not a pacemaker for the heart, it's a pacemaker for the brain. When you have a pacemaker, the purpose of the pacemaker is to stimulate and regulate heart activity and function. Same with the brain. It's a different type of device. It's not, we can't use the heart pacemakers in the brain. These are unique for the brain only. But basically, these devices are put underneath the skin, sometimes under the armpit, sometimes up front, and then wires are run upwards, up into the neck and into the area here called the vagus nerve, and then there are wires that are put around the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is a cranial nerve which is very important for heart rate, salivation, voice, speaking. The reason we use the vagus nerve is we can send an electrical signal back up that way into the brain, and then it helps disrupt the abnormal discharges and signals. So another way of thinking about it is, we talked about the interstate highway process. If you think of this as a stoplight that's constantly going on, it slows it down. And if you're in Atlanta, you sometimes will see these stoplights on the on-ramps coming on to slow in the speed of the traffic, so there's better merging of traffic. This is another way of looking at slowing down the activity in the brain so it doesn't go on and become a major seizure. So the benefit is this is constantly firing to slow down this abnormal discharge going on in the brain. In Heather's situation, she needed a higher frequency and higher voltage, and as a result, the battery ran down quickly. And for some patients, it can last 10, 15 years. Unfortunately, in Heather's circumstance, we were sometimes getting into replacement every year and a half, 2 years. The other benefit of having this is, if you have a breakthrough seizure, you can take a magnet and you can run a magnet over the side, and then there's a magnetic setting which sets off an impulse, extra bolt. So it's basically giving an extra stop sign or stoplight across the board to try and get everything slowed down and stop the seizure activity. It doesn't always work, but the purpose is to try and diminish and recover and kind of reset the process. The vagus nerve was actually implanted down here on the chest wall or underneath the armpit. Then the wiring is tunneled up through here, and then they attach it to the vagus nerve, which is, it's kind of hard to see, is one of these small little yellow nerves coming up here, and those are cranial nerves. So here's the vagus nerve right here. So if you wire it, if you have a wiring coming up here and just wrapping around it, and that's essentially how it works. And then you have your stimulator down here. You're able to send a signal back up to the brain, up through here, which then, where the brain is miscommunicating back and forth, you're able to disrupt this miscommunication going on.
Even though we had the vagus nerve stimulator on board and she's had numerous replacements, because her settings are so high and it burns the device up within 2 years, there were times where Heather would lock into seizure activity and there was no way to stop them. We would check her device. Sometimes it meant that the battery had failed and was dying and we needed a replacement, and sometimes that would take care of it. And then there was a time back in 2007 where she locked in with seizure activity, and it's around the clock every 10 minutes. And we try Solumedrol again. The doctors have no answers. They just put their hands in the air. We're told she could never have surgery again because her speech was left-sided, and to do so would handicap her further. So what happened in 2007 was we met Dr. Rankin for the first time, and he was on board and telling us that there was a new medication that he wanted to administer to Heather. He felt like it would stop this cycle of seizures.
We had never tried or even heard about this medication before because it was a black labeled medicine. It was a medicine that could possibly cause death. The mortality rate was very high. That's the reason why it was not a medicine that was pushed as often. It was also at this same time frame that we heard for the very first time that Heather had continuous seizure activity on the brain. So first time it ever really registered with us. You see, it wasn't just her having the 3 to 5 seizures outwardly on the best of days. She was seizing continuously all throughout the day. This was a child and a teenager, an adolescent, later an adult, a young adult, that would be able to function with continuous seizure activity that one day we'd find out she had 3 main places in her brain that were greatly affected because of the disease that she had. After we consented to allow Dr. Rankin to administer the Felbitol, Heather began to improve. However, they also believed that they should transfer Heather down to Emory University. She was there for about a week, maybe 7 days to 10 days, but Heather's seizures began to be under control.
About 2 weeks later, after they had given Heather the Felbitol and the seizure pattern had broke, she got an allergic reaction, and we had to take her to the dermatologist where they did a biopsy and confirmed that it was the drug, and came back to the room and said, we have to stop the drug immediately. You can't usually stop anticonvulsants immediately. You have to wean off of them because there is a great risk of generating more seizures. So that was very tough to make that call because in my mind, I'm afraid we're going to get those seizures going again.
The great thing was it helped to break the cycle of seizures that she had been in. Plus, may I add, the many, many prayers of the people of God.
This has been an amazing, unbelievable journey, and had you told me 20-something years ago that this would be the path our family would take, I would have said there's no way we can do that. But God's grace has been sufficient to carry us through every level and every step of the way. Heather has been very critical numerous times at the point of death with these seizures, and quality of life has been interrupted many a times, and always a fear when she would lock into activity, is this going to be it? Will we be able to stop this? Will we be able to control it? Will she be able to be who she is again?
Throughout Heather's illness and the many times that Heather's been in the hospital, I've had many, many people would ask us different questions such as, how are you getting through this? How are you making this? How are you surviving? What's sustaining you? And I would say to them, we believe firmly it's the prayers of God's people, but it's the Lord who has provided us the grace and strength to go through these things. And I remember many times family as well as friends would say, I couldn't go through that. And I also remember getting off the phone with people after I said that we were okay. And I remember walking the halls of the hospital saying, Lord, I said it was okay, but I'm sure I'm having a hard time. With knowing that everything's going to be okay.
Some of the hardest days was when you were standing next to Heather and all of a sudden a seizure would hit her, and this is when she was pretty mobile. And a seizure would hit her and she would be in the floor before you even had a chance to try to stop her from falling. I remember one time she was helping my dad. She walked outside to give my dad a glass of tea while he's cutting the yard. And she turned around to go back inside. And a seizure hit her and she landed face first on our porch and knocked out her 2 front teeth. And my dad could see it, of course, in slow motion as he's trying to get to her. And he could see her head ricochet on the pavement. And we all my dad hollered for us, and we came outside, and we just knew that this was probably going to be it for Heather. But Heather has had so many times like that, but she's always been okay. There was one time that me and her nurse were at home, and Heather had gone to the bathroom. Her nurse was standing right beside her, and a seizure hit her, and Heather had her gait belt on, but she slid right out from underneath her nurse and landed in the floor. Broke her collarbone. Took us about an hour to get her out of our bathroom. There were many times like that. We would hear a fall throughout the house, and we would all just go running, just in frantic, trying to find where she's at. We didn't know what kind of shape she would be in when we got to her.
I remember hearing a gospel message being preached at this service. And at this service, in the message, the preacher had said that there are burdens for a season that many people have had, and then there are burdens of a lifetime. When that preacher said there are burdens of a lifetime, he looked at my wife and I and our family, and he said, such is the case with the Capes. That had only been about 2.5 years. You see, we never believed that this was going to be for a lifetime. And when he said that, I must admit I was a little upset with him, because we believed firmly that Heather was going to be okay, and that any day and any week her illness would be over, and it wouldn't be for a lifetime. But yet for the last 23 years it has been a lifetime. But yet all through this burden of a lifetime, God's grace has truly been sufficient for every need that our daughter has had and for every need that our family has had.
Although the seizures came back with force and the disease of Rasmussen's was taking its toll, Heather and her family continued to fight and search for answers.
Unless Heather or patients like Heather get in front of the right doctor, you're not going to get the right treatments going forward. And so it's important that the family advocate for the patient in that role to make sure that they're in front of the right person. And that's hard. It's hard. Because you don't know who the right doctor is. I don't know who the right doctor is sometimes either. But it's important for families to not necessarily just take it on face value when someone says, well, there's nothing else that can be done, that's it, and go forward. It's important for families to understand that medicine is constantly changing. And medicine is a practice. It's the practice of medicine. And because we're all constantly practicing, we're getting better. And the more we practice and the better we get, the more new options we have and more things we have to change and more things we have to offer down the road. So it's important for a family to stay engaged, because the patient is unable to, when they're having seizure types like this. The patient is unable to comprehend what's going on, especially when they're having seizures all the time. They may not understand what the physician has said.
I read in a medical journal as I sat in a doctor's office one day about a new device. It had just been approved by the FDA. It's called the NeuroPace. The NeuroPace device was similar to the VNS. However, this was actually implanted within the brain surface, and it would go to one location on the brain to help stimulate it as the VNS would do. But yet, as we began to investigate and begin to ask about the NeuroPace, we then went to Vanderbilt University. Our very first appointment was with a neurosurgeon. How we got that appointment first, I'm not exactly sure, but we went to the neurosurgeon before we ever went to the neurologist. It was sitting in the office of Dr. Nemot, the neurosurgeon of Vanderbilt University, that he said some things to us on that day that we had a very difficult time with.
The doctor looked straight at us and he said he had not implanted one of the neuropace devices at this point, but he felt strongly after hearing Heather's history that this device would not help her. He said the only thing that will help Heather is to take the left side of her brain out.
We were both very shocked to hear this because we were told years ago Heather would never be a candidate for another brain surgery again because of where her speech was located. It was on the left side of her brain. We knew that because of her prior surgery back in 1996.
When we met Dr. Khalil for the first time, he immediately brought Heather in, turned her device off, wheeled her down to MRI, and within minutes of getting the MRI, we were back in his office and he's giving us the results of the MRI. And after looking at her brain on the films, he looked at us and said, the only thing we have to offer Heather would be to remove the left side of her brain.
So yes, when I first met Heather, I noticed that her right hand was twitching all the time. This was like a constant seizure activity. We call that epilepsia partialis continua. So in addition to the other seizure types that she had, this was a continuous motor seizure activity. In itself, it's not always a serious thing, but certainly that seizure activity can spread, and when it spreads, it can do bad things. So there was a need to stop it, if possible.
When we were hearing these statements, Heather was 29 years of age. She was a young adult. She was no longer a pediatric. We knew of children having hemispherectomies when they were just toddlers and beginner-age children. And even the reason why Heather in 1996 did not have a hemispherectomy was because she was already 11 years of age, and they knew that if they had removed all of that left side, that she would suffer greatly with other neurological issues and deficiencies. And so even then in 96, it was very alarming to make that kind of decision for an 11-year-old child. But now to think of a 29-year-old lady to do so. So we were very fearful of it, believing that this would make our daughter into a vegetative type state. Because we knew that as a child, that the brain for a pediatric or for a child had tremendous plasticity, and where the brain could adapt and could develop new brain pathways. But for an adult, we had never read nor heard of an individual being able to overcome those obstacles that a child could overcome.
I felt that Heather's right hemisphere would function much better if it could be free from the seizure activity that's bombarding it. I felt that this hemisphere was suppressed, and that if we can remove the bad influence of the left hemisphere, that it could flourish and function a lot better, that its potential would come out, and that at that point in time, we really were not seeing all that this hemisphere could do if it were left alone and allowed to function at its best potential.
We told Dr. Khalil that the left side of her brain was where Heather's speech was, and we've been doing seizures for over 20 years, but I did not think I personally could let her go through something like this if it meant taking who she was. So he looked at us and he said, we will get all the testing that we need. And he told us right then, but I believe her speech has moved over to the other side of the brain.
He told us that because Heather could do many things and could communicate while she was in the middle of a seizure. She could talk to us at the beginning of a seizure or even toward the end of a seizure. She could sometimes sing in a seizure that would would go into more of a prolonged seizure, even becoming generalized. But the beginning stages of that seizure, she could communicate. So Heather was able to recover a good bit quicker than the normal individual who had a seizure or a seizure became generalized. And so that's when Dr. Khalil believed that her speech had already moved to the right side. However, most of the other professionals didn't believe that, and we even questioned that too.
All tests leading up to this point confirmed that Heather's left hemisphere was completely affected by the disease of Rasmussen's encephalitis. There was only one more test that could be performed before the doctors would proceed to remove the diseased left side. This test would confirm which side of Heather's brain was responsible for her speech and memory.
They set Heather up for a WADA test, and this was going to be the determining factor of whether or not she would be able to have half of her brain removed. It was a very difficult day for us as we traveled to the hospital that morning, and because we knew this was going to finalize what the doctors were telling us was the only hope for Heather.
So a WADA test is a test devised by Dr. Jun Wada, who's a Japanese neuroscientist and a neurosurgeon. It involves the injection of an anesthetic in one carotid artery that supplies half the brain. And that causes that hemisphere to go to sleep, and then we can examine the other hemisphere to see whether language functions are present in that remaining hemisphere. And the test was subsequently changed to also test for memory function. So the WADA test involves putting one hemisphere to sleep and thus examining the other hemisphere. And then after a period of recovery, we can repeat the test on the other side to see what the other side is able to do with respect to language and memory in particular.
We live 145 miles away from Vanderbilt, and as we traveled to the hospital that day, we were pretty quiet heading that direction because we were contemplating and thinking about the results. And probably about 30 minutes into the trip, Heather began to sing a Bible verse. It reminded us of the truths of God's Word that is so much brought comfort to our life and given us strength. And so Heather said, "Dad, you sing a verse." And so I picked a verse that our whole family would know, a verse that was put to memory. We sang it with a tune. And then Mom sang one, and then our younger daughter, she sang one. And we did so, and over the next hour, and before we knew it, we were now at the hospital. And over 100 verses from the Bible had been put to memory years before, and we all sang these by memory together. It was a great comfort to our heart, and we believed that whatever the outcome, that God was leading us and the doctors in the right direction.
When I performed Heather's WADA test with a left internal carotid artery injection, we saw her language function temporarily removed, that with a left carotid injection, she couldn't talk. Normally, this would mean, not surprisingly, that language exists in the left hemisphere. However, because Heather has somewhat unusual anatomy in that the left carotid also supplies a small part of the right hemisphere, Heather's epileptologist, Dr. Khalil, thought that perhaps the language center had moved into that part of the right hemisphere. For that reason, Dr. Khalil advocated that we do a super-selective WADA injection. What that means is rather than injecting the medication into the internal carotid artery, we would actually go further with a smaller catheter into an artery called the middle cerebral artery. That would get us to a point past the branch that was also supplying that small part of the right hemisphere. In getting to that point, we can then isolate the lateral or the side part of the left side of the brain and really determine whether or not that's where language is or if it might be somewhere else. And so that's what we did. After talking with Heather's father, we made the decision to take on even a little more risk and actually put a catheter all the way up into a brain artery, the middle cerebral artery, and do the injection there. When we did that injection, we found that Heather could still talk. So really what that showed us is that her language center had in fact moved away from the place that we expected it to, which essentially gave us the green light to go ahead with epilepsy surgery.
When I walked into the surgery room, Heather already had her arms in the air, and they said, "Go, Heather." And Heather began to count again. 1, 2, 3. On that third time again, Heather's right arm fell, just as it had done prior a few minutes before. But then Heather began to continue to count. 4, 5, 6. About the time she got to 6 or 7, Dr. Khalil, who was standing beside me, raised his hand in the air and shouted out, "Yes, yes, yes." I was stunned, I was shocked. I honestly wasn't sure of what all this meant. And then he began to explain to me of the procedure that I had just agreed upon a few minutes prior, that this is what they were doing to keep the medicine from leaking over to the right side. And now this meant that Heather's brain was put to sleep on the left-hand side, but now she was able to communicate, she was able to talk. They took several items out of a box that they had shown Heather prior to that test, and Heather was able to recognize those same items that she had looked at before. There was a set of keys, there was a little matchbox car, and I heard her as she was able to not just speak, but also comprehend. And that was very important for them. And then Dr. Khalil called me off to the side, and he was talking to me. I remember hearing Dr. Froehler say to Dr. Khalil, "Can I close her up? Can I finish her surgery?" And Dr. Khalil said, "Yes, please." And then I heard, as Dr. Khalil is talking to me, Dr. Froehler finishing up the surgery, I heard one of the nurses say to Heather, "Heather, will you sing us a song?" Heather, laying flat on her back in the operating room, began to sing a song that she learned years ago as a little girl. And the first words out of her mouth as she laid flat on that operating table was, "God never moves without purpose or plan. In trying his servant or molding a man, give thanks to the Lord." And when I heard her singing that, I listened, and the entire operating room was completely, deathly quiet and silent as they heard my daughter sing to the praise and glory of her God. God had moved her speech, you see, from her left side that we knew about in '96 to the right side. Whether it took several years for that to happen or not, whether it happened within just those few moments of time, I'm not sure. But I do know for sure that her speech was moved, which made her a candidate of having this surgery take place. She could have this hemispherectomy.
Now that we've confirmed that Heather's speech is indeed on the right side, then that gives us the opportunity to move forward to do what we do not want to do, and that is take out the left side of her brain. This was a very hard decision again, and one that we did not take lightly. Our family discussed everything numerous times, and we sat down with Heather, explained what was about to take place, and that this had to be her decision because this was her life. And Heather decided that she wanted her seizures gone and that she wanted the surgery. So we set the surgery up. It was 2 months after the results of the WADA test.
On the day of the surgery, it was very early in the morning that we arrived. But as we arrived, other people began to come to the hospital as well. Again, we live 145 miles away from Vanderbilt, and by the time it was within the hour of the surgery, there were over 30 people that were present for support and for prayer for Heather as she would go into the surgery that would last for, again, 11 hours.
While we were all sitting in the atrium there at Vanderbilt University, we were having hourly updates, and we have a website that we were keeping people posted about Heather's condition and what was taking place. And the encouraging fact about through the surgery was that the surgeon had heard about the website, and he had them open a computer and open the website up while he's operating on Heather and have them read to him some of the things that we had posted about her life. And that was amazing to hear, that while he's operating on our daughter, he's hearing about her story and hearing some comments and updates from people around the country that are praying for him specifically.
We're all very thrilled to have Dr. Nemot come out to sit in front of us and explain to us what happened. He told us that he believed that the surgery was very successful, and she would go into recovery, and from recovery she would go into the intensive care.
They wheeled Heather out to from the surgery to the ICU room, and everybody was given an opportunity to walk back and see her. And we had warned everyone that she would not look like herself because the face swells and you just look distorted after having a brain surgery as such. But everybody got to go back and see her, and she wouldn't wake up. It took 7 days for her to wake up, and the ICU team was very alarmed. They couldn't understand what was going on. There was reported seizure activity on the left side of the brain, and again, even though it's disconnected, but parts that were left were still seizing that were attached by the blood supply to the other side of the brain. So that wasn't unusual that there was seizure activity, but it wasn't crossing over. However, because she had not woke up, Dr. Nemot was suspicious that he had caused a stroke in the surgery because he had to take a major blood vessel to make the disconnect. And that is indeed what had happened, which left Heather completely paralyzed on the right side. No one anticipated Heather's recovery being as long as it was. And after the surgery and after being in ICU for 4 weeks, they then transferred her to the rehab facility there at Vanderbilt.
She was in intensive care for 4 weeks. After that, Heather would go to Vanderbilt Stallworth. She would be in rehab there for over a month. Then she would be transferred to the Siskin Rehab Hospital in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Her rehab at Stallworth didn't go as quickly as everyone assumed that it would. And after 4 weeks, it was taking a toll on our family because we lived so far away. And we requested that we transfer her to a local facility here in Chattanooga, and about the possibilities of getting the family back together and being closer to our home so that we could assist Heather as much as possible.
On March 17, 2015, Heather was transferred from Vanderbilt Stallworth Rehab Hospital in Nashville to Siskin Rehab Hospital in Chattanooga.
When I first met Heather, she was the first patient I had ever taken care of who had a hemispherectomy and was missing part of her brain. So immediately you begin to study and you begin to think, how am I going to approach a rehabilitation strategy with this patient? On top of that, she had had a severe stroke and was lacking the use of one side of her body. And so knowing that I do work at a great rehabilitation hospital here at Siskin, have a great team of rehabilitation professionals, we knew that we'd have to be unique and formulate a strategy that would help Heather and design each part of it so that each of her rehabilitation deficits were addressed. Heather had been transferred from another rehabilitation center, and it's very unique. We call that a lateral transfer. It's kind of like a handoff from one facility to another. We never really see that in rehab medicine. It's very rare. I can probably count on one hand how many times that's happened. Insurances usually don't want to pay for that sort of thing. But they must have seen something special in Heather, just like we have along the way. And I don't regret their decision at all. They made an excellent decision, and it's helped propel Heather to where she is today.
When Heather came to me in May of 2015, I would say she was very low level. She was in a wheelchair. She required somebody to push the wheelchair for her. But I think the biggest thing was fear. Fear really controlled a lot of things Heather did. She was afraid to even get from her chair to the mat. She was afraid even sitting to lean to the right. She couldn't see anything to the right. So that side of her world really didn't exist. And we had to work with that, and there was a lot of behaviors that went with that, and overcoming those behaviors was difficult because of that fear. And physically, you know, she was a totally different person. She was not as mobile. She couldn't really roll herself around on a bed by herself. She couldn't get sitting up by herself. There was no thought at that time of even standing by herself. I mean, it was a 1 to 2 person transfer just to get her from the wheelchair to a stable surface. So, and there was a lot of emotions. There was a lot of crying in those days, you know, and we just didn't know where she was going to get to at that point.
Throughout her therapy, she experienced a lot of different changes. The nerve endings from the brain resection caused pain. Just even approaching the right side of the body, Heather would be fearful, and to her it would be very painful, and to ever even touch the right side. And so the therapists were very patient as they sought to help her to realize and help her brain to understand that she does still have a right arm, she does still have a right leg, and the brain needs to now compensate for that and teach itself that it has to function and it must function.
We came to some plateaus in our treatment where we wanted to see more gains, but we weren't getting there. And with her, a lot of the time, we would kind of stretch to try something new. And we weren't sure, but we went ahead and tried it anyway. And she surprised us each time, and over time she was able to accomplish it. You know, walking from, you know, to being able to stand, she stood for, 10 seconds. One of my goals was being able to stand for 10 seconds. And that was with a platform walker, where both elbows could be pressing down into a platform. Yeah, and she was complaining the whole time and wanting to sit down, but she surpassed that, and that 10 seconds went to 2 minutes, and it went a little bit further to trying some different devices to hold on to while she was standing. Learning how to unweight one leg and take a step forward. And with that, we were trying to gain motion in her ankle and in her hip and knee. So she was able to hold her trunk upright while she took a step and not cause her to have that fear and fall forward. We came to some other challenges because it took more than 1 or 2 people to work with her to ambulate a few feet across the gym floor, or 40 feet. It was a pretty big accomplishment, but it took 2 people, and we were sweating and encouraging, and it took a very extensive amount of time. And one person was holding this leg, and another person was holding the bilateral platform walker, and then another person was helping support the other leg so the first leg could step. Very time intensive and labor intensive.
You just keep your head up and kick your leg through. Yep. There you go. Look at the head up.
Look at Mr. Watts and Miss Watts down there. Yeah, look down there. Watch them. There's Caitlin cheering you on, girl.
Push that leg down and swing it through.
Look at you moving that leg, girl.
Yeah.
First time by yourself.
It's getting too easy. Throw a weight on that thing.
All right, Heather.
Oh, Oh, yeah.
Give Caitlin a big old high five.
Fist bump.
Oh, David.
Woo, yeah. Awesome.
We wanted to jump into our Locomat, which is a robotic-assisted treadmill device. It's a body support treadmill. But she was so fearful to even put weight on that leg. And it wasn't necessarily fear, it was just the uncertainty. And she would have pain, and any new activity required a little bit more encouragement. We got on there, had to get off the first day. We tried it again. We tried to find ways to make her more comfortable. And each time we were able to build up that time. So I may tell her, today, Heather, we're only gonna stand for 10 minutes, and we're gonna do some standing and weight shifting. We're not gonna turn the machine on, we're just gonna stand here. And that built up to where we decided to try to walk a little bit. And the Locomat offered a device where we could get her connected in. It took a little bit of effort first to get her the amount of range of motion that she needed to get in there so we could facilitate full movement. But once we were there, and it took a little bit of extra time too because we needed the hypertonicity in those legs and the muscles to calm down in order to have the normal range. But it allowed us to have a longer amount of time upright with her legs moving to facilitate better the neuroplasticity. That repetition that you need allows her to go a longer distance and be supported in an upright way.
Heather is a remarkable young woman, patient, friend. I feel like when I started at Siskin, she was starting here. So I've seen her progress and make a ton of changes. She's positive, she's caring, she lights up the gym. She always has something nice to say for other people. She's encouraging to herself and to others, and always a pleasure to work with.
When I first met her, it was a couple months after her left hemispherectomy. That was in January of 2015, and I first met her in May, and that was after she briefly stayed with us as an inpatient, and then she came to the outpatient, and I was the first one to work with her. And I would describe her communication as codependent. She looked to others, mom and dad, to answer for her. I would describe her conversation as there was no meat to it. She could communicate very basic, how are you, good, fine, thank you. She would perseverate, she would get stuck on I'm sorry, and was apologizing constantly for her lack of content. I think she was aware of it, but she could never really get her true meaning, her opinions, her thoughts. She's a complex, full of personality person, and it was hard to relay that to others. This is an animal.
Okay.
You find it in the woods. You can find them around here. And
let me think. Okay, keep going. Sorry.
Okay, and it has antlers.
Okay, let me concentrate. Let me think. Okay, come back to that.
Okay, well first tell me what do you have a picture in your mind?
Antlers.
Has
okay.
antlers.
Okay.
And a lot of people actually like to go hunting for these.
Okay, let me think. A deer.
Good job, Heather, good. All right, your turn.
Yes, ma'am.
Having had a left hemispherectomy,
This is something
you would expect it to be what we call empty speech, being not full of content, because in 97% of people, that speech and language center is localized to the left side of your brain. And the fact that that's been removed, we were seeing what was typical of a person with aphasia, not being able to really explain what she was thinking or feeling and not having the words to relate that.
In my field, we meet so many special people, but and we see people when they're at their most vulnerable, and we never know where people are going to get to when we first see them, but we always have sort of an estimate. And I think with Heather, she really taught me. She was really the first person I've ever had who just blew every expectation out of the water. I mean, she's just gone so far beyond anything we ever could have dreamed for her. And so she's really taught me, you know, not to give up on somebody just by the way they come in, and to, you know, really believe in the power of hope and that she can overcome, and the positivity that she has, you know. Even from day one, she's always said, you know, God makes no mistakes, and coming from the situation that she has been in, that's a pretty incredible outlook, and that's very inspiring to me and I know to other patients who come here also.
Heather is extremely pleasant. You know, when I see her name on my schedule, I'm happy. I like to see her. I enjoy her family. Everything is positive about the visit. Every visit I see her, it's something new. She's made some new gain, some new progress. So it's very encouraging for me. It helps us know that we are doing something positive for her. Heather is a great example of the power of faith. You know, the Bible says that we need to come boldly to the throne of grace when we need help. The Bible says that the prayer of a faithful man or woman can save the sick, and that the prayer of the faithful is powerful. And I believe in that. I believe in Heather's recovery. I believe she's an excellent example of hard work and determination, faith in God, and that has led her to where she is today.
I've never seen that girl without a smile on her face. And I've worked with a lot of people. I see a lot of people who haven't been through half of what she's been through, and don't have half of her good-naturedness, her positive attitude. She's never complained once, not once. And she comes, and when she comes to therapy, she doesn't just have 1 hour of therapy, she has 4 hours of therapy. And a lot of times I see her in that 4th hour or that 3rd hour where she's tired, run down, wants to give up, but she doesn't. We're going on a little over 2 years now since I've known her well and worked with her, and to this day not complained once. And to all other outsiders, she has every right to. She deals with pain and being able to have to depend on others for things that are hard to depend on others for. But she's amazing, not only for that, but because she's doing things with half a brain. She's talking to me, she's asking me how I am. She remembers. She asks me about my twins every day. She recites scripture that I've tried to memorize for a lifetime and never have, but she does. She does. She's amazing.
The neurosurgeon who performed Heather's hemispherectomy, Dr. Joseph S. Nemot, had written in a letter, "When I saw her a year after the surgery, almost 6 months since I had seen her last, I was struck about how articulate she had become. She spoke more fluently, voiced thoughtful and meaningful opinions, and was proud and poised in the way she carried herself."
Many times Heather would be so tired before brain surgery in 2015, that she would just have to sleep the majority of the day. It was hard for her to carry on conversations. But now, Heather is free to talk to anybody she meets and carry on a conversation with you, ask you how your day is going, and then she goes a little deeper. And it's just amazing seeing the individual who she is now rather than who she was before. And just the miracle of what God did in her life, just being able to have the surgery is remarkable. And then she's even better now than she was before.
Heather asked me if I would come to her church. And I was like, sure, I think I could do that. And I still keep a pretty busy schedule on the weekends, and I have a church I'm involved with, but I thought it would be special to go attend church with her. And then I found out it was actually a special service where they were honoring the medical field. And so I was very honored during that service. They had us stand up and mentioned our involvement with Heather and her recovery. And then I found out they wanted me to walk Heather to the front of the church. And I wasn't sure that was going to happen. And she was at the place where her foot was still dragging. She was needing help. She was using a platform walker. Like one arm was on a platform, and she needed that. And she would lose her postural endurance, and she would start losing control and dragging her limb. But she was with it that day, and she wanted to walk a good over 80 or 90 or something feet downhill upstairs, up to the area where the choir sang. I was like, I was thinking this is going to be a challenge, but she stepped up and she knocked it out. Her change from when we first met to me helping her in her church was dramatic. Not just the physical point, but her willingness to accept a challenge and her willingness to do it anyway, even though she wasn't sure. So that's something, you know, she's taught me.
Now quit that, keep on. I'll stop it too.
Music was always important to us. Starting when I was real little, our family sang in church. We always had music going at our house. And one thing we learned, Heather has focal seizures today. And one thing that she does even now is sing. If she feels it coming on, her lip will start to go up and even twitch. And she'll say, "Hey, let's sing a song." So she'll just immediately start singing, and within a few seconds, her seizure goes away.
You have to like kind of say that physically it's too much for you to get forward and letting her know she's secure.
I do see them often, maybe 2 or 3 times within a session. And when it happens, she lets me know. She says, I'm having one. She alerts me. She doesn't freak out. She's learned to work through them through singing. And it's amazing. We before we started, we saw it happen. She chose one of her hymns from her hymn book in her brain on the right side. And she sings her way through it. And through singing, she's learned to cope, and they subside within about a minute or so.
Heather is a good reminder that we don't have the answers for everything. We learn a lot in school. Certain things should fall into a textbook, but Heather is a perfect example that people are all different. The brain is all different, and there's a lot of different things that go into rehabilitation. You know, there's a lot of, if you were to look at Heather's case, just pull it apart and look at it medically, there's a lot of reasons she shouldn't be doing what she's doing now. But she is one of the reasons that I love doing physical therapy. I think probably a lot of the reason that a lot of my colleagues do too, because you see these remarkable changes that don't happen all the time. And a lot of it is because she's determined, because she has a determined family, and no one gives up on her. You know, continuously pushing for for her to reach the next step, whether it's with her walking, whether it's with her self-care, whether it's with her speech. There's always someone, whether it's herself, her family, or therapist, pushing her to that next level.
The care of Heather has helped me in the care of my future patients. Anytime you're a physician, your learning does not stop in medical school. It doesn't stop in residency. I'm continuing to learn this day, and I'll continue to learn until I retire. Heather presented a unique situation to us, one that we had not encountered before, and personally I had never encountered before, but she still has rehabilitation deficits. And whether or not you've had a brain injury or a stroke, or you've had half of your brain taken out, those deficits remain the same, and we can still, within some reason, approach them in a similar way, although unique for each patient.
I just find Heather to be a very pure soul. In a lot of ways she's very innocent, and she's just bright and bubbly, and you know, with everything she's gone through, she always cares about other people, and she's always looking out for everyone else. You know, she's always making sure nobody else is uncomfortable with the situation, and she's just so bubbly and warm, and we just love her here. You know, I think she's such a people person, and I know she has a strong passion for reaching others. She and I have talked about that, you know, in the past, that her dream when she was younger was to be a missionary, and that she wants to be able to do something in that way, even though she realizes physically she may not be able to do that. But yes, I just think she's an incredible person. I'm very blessed to have met her.
Honestly, she isn't a patient of mine anymore. She's a friend. And we were about the same age. And we have a rapport with each other. She's interested in my life, I'm interested in hers. She's met my kids, she's held my babies. When I'm having a hard day and I work with Heather, she makes it better. She makes it better. And I have quite a few hard days now because I don't get much sleep. But working with Heather energizes me, because it's hard to work with someone who's so full of life, so full of light, and you don't walk away changed. She's so kind, she's so thoughtful, and I hope that I can continue to work with her for a long time, because she's my friend.
She's sharper now than she was before she had the surgery. I know she used to, I'd call her, I had to call her, and she would, she'd say a few words, not much. I'm doing good, this, that, and other, but now she calls me and we have a conversation. We can talk, and she can tell me what's on her mind, what she's been doing, and it's good. It turned out good. Praise God.
We know that everything happens in life for a reason. Maybe it's to better you. Maybe it's to better me. Maybe it's to bring us closer to the Lord. Maybe it's to help somebody else who's going through similar situations. And the biggest lesson that can be learned in all of our lives is that God makes no mistakes.
It's a magic quarter.
It had been over 19 years since Heather, her family, and Dr. Holt had seen each other. During the filming of this documentary, they had the opportunity to meet together at Eggleston Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, Georgia.
Yes.
Good to see you.
Hey, how are you, Dr. Holt?
I've had the fortune of knowing Heather and her whole family, and knowing that when she had progressive epilepsy and was critically ill, how strong their faith and bond was. And so I feel I was blessed from knowing Heather in the Capes. Had the benefit of seeing her respond to surgery and be able to get better in rehab and go home with her family, and had really the pleasure and the blessing to visit the Capes in their home church at Heather's celebration, and I felt blessed to be part of that.
Most obvious quality that I see is that Heather is positive, and Heather is always wanting to do better, and she looks at the bright side of things, and she doesn't let herself be brought down by small setbacks. And I think that's a big secret to her improvement and her success. And what I hope for her is that this attitude will continue throughout her life. It'll take her far. And I would like to see her continue to make progress. And I think that'll keep her happy. And I can see that happening. I can see her catching up every month with skills that she may have missed on when she was suffering with very frequent seizures in the past.
Well, I believe that Heather could continue her recovery to the point where she is today for a number of reasons. Number one, Heather has a strong faith in God, and that certainly that in combination with her family has helped propel her to where she is today. She has an incredibly supportive family. They've never given up on her. They're at her side all the time. And when folks have a strong family support, they have a much higher likelihood of discharging home to the community and being successful in the rehabilitation. That combined with her young age, her willingness to work hard, all of these factors come together to make a great rehabilitation candidate.
Heather's journey with her epilepsy and treatment, I think, is a reminder to myself and all medical people and to families that at times is a journey, that we have ups and downs in the course of treatment and responses, but kind of the perseverance to work through it and to try new technologies, sort of be sure we're applying knowledge that we have and utilizing options that we do get increasingly to better and better outcomes.
There have been literally thousands of people take care of our daughter in the last 20 years. And we want to say thank you for everything that you have done that has helped aid us in getting Heather to where she is today, freed of constant seizure activity and a functioning woman in our society.
Heather has made tremendous advances. Her speech is unbelievable. Her physical abilities to get around and to walk freely. Her abilities to do things that occupational skills have assisted her with is pretty phenomenal. She's a different person. She's the same individual with the same spirit and joy and happiness that she had prior to not only this surgery of 2015, but also to the one of 1996, as well as throughout the last 23 years. We're very thankful. We're very grateful for the medical field. We're very grateful for the training that people have experienced. We're grateful for folks who wouldn't give up, people that have not only trained for these type of situations, but then also have sought to grow more themselves. They likewise have had to be stretched as they've cared for an individual like Heather, and we're very thankful.
There is no doubt that Heather's life has been through a raging storm, a storm that has damaged her health, troubled her family, and challenged her faith. If there is one truth that Heather has taught us all, it is this: every storm of life may bring heartache and pain, but if we determine to help others, love our family, stay faithful to God, and smile, that storm can never take away our song.
Next to Jesus, besides Jesus, I know you love Jesus, but tell me who else you love in this room, who means the most to you.
My family.
Okay.
What makes you so happy?
Because I have the right spirit in me.
What is that spirit?
God's spirit. I want to thank all of y'all that have been praying for me and as well across the country. My name is Heather Cape, and I just want to praise the Lord. This is my story for God's glory.
Around the wheel till their submission to His will. He's planned a beautiful design, but it will take some fire and time. It's gonna be okay, 'cause the potter knows the clay.
Friend, I just came through that fire not so very long ago, and looking back I can see why, and that my God was in control. But on the hardest days I cried, oh Lord, isn't it about time?
But the potter knows the clay, how much pressure it can take, how many times around the wheel, till their submission to His will. He's planned a beautiful design, but it'll take some fire and time. It's gonna be okay, 'cause the potter knows the clay. He's planned a beautiful design, but it'll take some fire and time. It's gonna be okay, 'cause the potter knows the clay. It's gonna be okay,
'cause the potter knows the clay.